When you grow up in a military family, there's a certain pressure to join up yourself when you come of age. My grandpa served in World War II, my dad in Vietnam, and we bled red, white, and blue in the name of freedom. I've since changed my views on things like that, but hey, you can't do much to change the past. I ended up joining the service in my junior year of high school, getting training out of the way in the summer between my junior and senior year. It was back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, so the military was all about throwing people all over the world. My first was in Germany, and then I got a little bit of time in Guam, but my last deployment before getting out was in Japan. I ended up in the Kanagawa Prefecture, a super nice place and good access to the city, and the mountains were not that far away. It was amazing to get to leave for a couple of days and go hiking with my good friends. The city was pretty nice too, and God, the food. Everything was so fresh it made coming back to food in the States feel like I was eating field rations all the time, and it was so cheap too. Except Japan had a little more of a sinister side to it, usually when the sun set. I learned from a few locals working on base when I got there that some weird stuff happens on occasion, and just to roll with it and act as normal as possible. Hell, a couple of them recommended that I visit a shrine and just make a prayer offering. I heeded their advice about 2 weeks later after my first couple of encounters. Thank God the first thing that I ran into was one of the more harmless spirits. I was still in my mid-20s at the time and not out of my partying days quite yet. You ever been to a karaoke room? Yeah, they're fun as hell, and the alcohol is usually included or super cheap. Get a few friends and have a few drinks, sing a few songs with the passion of Freddie Mercury while realizing you sound more like Yoko Ono, and have a good laugh at it. Now, with the amount of alcohol included, it was very understandable that we got wasted. I don't think we finished up until maybe 1:30 that morning, stumbling out in search of food before heading home. Now, there are a ton of all-night places around, which helps a lot, but I was too tired to really care about food. Luckily, it was super easy to get anywhere in the city while you're totally sloshed, thanks to the rail system and everything. I told the others that I was going to head back home, making my way back to the little apartment that I was set up in for housing. A couple of train rides and I was at the nearest station, just a few blocks away, enough to walk in probably 30 minutes considering that I was still hobbling a little. Maybe halfway there on a dark street, I saw a figure standing about 10 meters away. They were small, facing the same direction that I was heading, so I could only see the back of their bald head. The gown it was wearing looked like the robes that a monk wears, so my drunk mind immediately went to, oh, little monk, wonder if he's lost. Look, I know that the US teaches us to be cautious of people on the streets, especially at night. But after living in other countries, you learn that people aren't nearly as violently out to get you as in America. It was pretty common here for young kids to travel alone on trains, walk the streets, and even run errands for their parents. Bad things still happen, obviously, but most people were a lot more respectful of other human beings at least. So, seeing a little kid alone on the street around 2 in the morning, I figured they might need some help finding home. There was a police station down the road, and so I approached the kid. The nearest streetlight at the intersection flickered, casting us into darkness for a moment. In the absence of light, I saw a small blue light that the kid was holding. As I got closer, I finally spoke up. "Hey there, are you lost? Do you need help?" I said it louder than intended. The kid didn't respond, and it took me a second to realize that I was speaking English, so they might not understand. Look, I'm not too smart when I've had a few drinks, so I decided to try again, even in my broken Japanese. The southern accent I still couldn't shake from being born and raised in South Georgia, and it wasn't a huge help. Konnichiwa? Ah, shit, what's the word for lost? Ushinida. Ushinada. The kid finally turned toward me after I got the words out. The little blue light it was holding grew brighter as it turned, illuminating their face. It looked normal for the most part, like a regular kid, but instead of eyes, there was one singular eye, massive in the middle of their face. That single eye was staring me down now, and I couldn't move despite my brain screaming at me to get the hell out of there. My legs turned to jelly, giving out underneath me as I fell to the ground, barely catching myself before my head hit the concrete. I still couldn't move while the thing shuffled toward me, blue light oppressing me even further as I sunk to the ground, trying to look up at that thing. It's something that I will never forget. God, typing it out makes it come back. I can still feel it, the thing leaning down toward me on the ground, looking me right in the eye and licking my cheek up to my temple. The tongue was scaly, with little points coming off of it that scraped roughly against my skin. I had just shaved that morning, making it feel even worse, closer to me. It was like a cat licking but more slimy, while still being rough against every small patch of flesh that it could reach. This little shit licked me, stood up and looked me in the eye, and walked away like nothing had happened. I couldn't move, heart racing, trying to figure out if I was just sloshed and attacked by some weirdo on the street, or thinking that what I saw was some kind of ghost. After a few minutes, my strength returned, finally able to stand up and make my way back to the barracks. I couldn't fall asleep the entire night. I almost stuck a scouring pad to my cheek to try to get rid of the feeling that had left in my skin. It was driving me insane. I must have looked like a wreck the next day, not too surprised. A couple of guys from karaoke the night before must have noticed too. I was sitting with a few of them in the mess hall, stirring spirals into my soup absent-mindedly. "You all right?" Matt, another soldier, had asked. "Looks like you've seen a ghost." I said, taking a minute to shake the fog out of my brain. "You ever sobered up from being absolutely ripped without a nap?" "Yeah, it sucks, like really sucks." "Might have, to be honest." "Oh, who did you run into?" Rue, a local working with us on base, asked. He was dozing off just moments before, but suddenly he was fully awake, a look of concern on his face. I don't really know. Thought it was a kid at first, like I could only see them from behind, bald and wearing a monk's robe. I asked them if they were lost, and then it's like, I don't know, like I just suddenly collapsed. I couldn't stand my feet. And then it looked at me, and that thing had one eye. I said, babbling on and still stirring my soup. When I was on the ground, though, it licked me. I don't know, man, I feel kind of violated. Rue snorted, Matt and I both unsure of what was happening as it began to turn into a full-throated laugh. "You got lucky. It's Asumi Kozo, Cyclops Children," he said, still laughing. "They're harmless, though. They can be, well, weird as you've experienced. Could have been worse." Sorry, worse. It gets worse than being licked by a dwarf Cyclops," Matt asked. "I'm gonna need the lowdown here, boss." "Oh, yeah, yokai can be very dangerous if you come across the right ones. You've heard of the Cuchi Saka Ona?" Rue asked, leaning forward. "There was an airman a while back, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. They covered his death as a suicide for his family. It was the Cuchi Saka Ona, though. The slit-mouthed woman." Nope, don't like the sound of that," Matt said, turning away. "You should take warning," Rue said again. "If you run into a woman hiding the lower half of her face, well then you've found the Cuchi Saka Ona. She'll ask you if you think she's pretty." "Oh, should I ask her out on a date?" Matt asked, snorting at his own joke. Rue only gave him a tired side-eye, used to his crappy jokes by now. "Well, you can't run away immediately. She'll take that as calling her ugly. Tell her she's pretty and then she'll show you the lower half of her face, mouth cut." He made a motion from one ear down across his mouth all the way back up to the other side, into a huge grin. "She'll ask you the question again. Tell her she's not pretty, she kills you with huge scissors. Tell her she's pretty, then she'll slice you just like her. They found that airman with his mouth slit. So you're screwed either way. I mean, that's kind of bad," I said, thinking back to last night. That was already awful enough. I didn't want to run into more. I just felt gross, and my skin tingling again with the feeling of being licked. The best method for getting away from a yokai is to confuse it. And this goes for a lot of them, from the Cuchi Saka Ona to the Akimando. Ask them a question in return and you'll have time to run. Rue looked us both in the eyes now, like a command to take him seriously. There are others to just avoid entirely. Run into some of the more vile ones and you'll be, well, as Americans say, screwed. Cool, never leaving the base again then I guess, I said, practically slamming my face into my soup. Guess since I saw one I'm going to be cursed now. No, not really. Just go to a shrine and make an offering. It's easy enough and it does wonders for protection, Rue said. Most are only restless spirits that couldn't move on. Offering a prayer for them can often make them ignore you, or just give you enough luck to avoid them. We chatted a little bit longer, Rue telling us about various local legends before we all split off back to work. I ended up getting swamped with work for the next week, unable to get a moment to breathe, much less get off base. Eventually, the incident kind of got left behind. I think I rationalized to myself that I was drunk and just imagined it or had a weird encounter. I should have remembered though. About a week later, I finally got a night off, and so I decided to go out and get some decent food other than what was served at the mess hall, and so I headed into town. Despite my plans to be back before it was late and the roads were deserted, I got caught up talking to a girl that I met. She was nice and I still have her number and we talk from time to time. We dated for a little while, but that was beside the point. By the time that I started back home, it was way past midnight. That said, this time I was totally sober, so I had that going for me at least. I was also closer to the base, so the walk was much shorter than before. Sounds like an easy trip, right? So I walked the girl home and started back on my way. About a block away, I heard a woman calling my name from behind me. Thomas. I thought that it was the girl, maybe inviting me back to her house since it was late. It would have been much better that way. But instead, I turned around and locked eyes with her. A tall woman, a long kimono covering down to her feet and a paper fan over her face, was standing just a few meters away looking at me. I almost fell back, instinct telling me to run before I stopped myself, thinking back to what Rue had said. She kept the fan up over her face, approaching me slowly and gliding over the ground like she was floating under the kimono. "Am I pretty?" she asked, still staring deep into my eyes. I couldn't look away no matter how hard I tried. Dark hair spilled down the sides of her face, big green eyes glowing while she stared me down. She was beautiful. "Yes, very," I said, almost compelled to say it. She let out a giggle, eyes lighting up even more. The paper fan started to close and a massive pair of scissors forming from the thin wooden edges. They glowed in the dim lights of the street, but that was secondary to what I saw now. "Am I still pretty?" she asked me again, smiling literally from ear to ear. I could see her teeth and jaws on both sides, split skin folding back from the mouth. Bright red blood was glistening around the cuts as if they were freshly made. Her smile was making me uneasy, trying to think of a way out of this to confuse her or even just run away. She reiterated again, "Am I still pretty?" Am I pretty?" I said, unable to think of anything but the question that she asked me. I immediately regretted that, closing my eyes tight and preparing to get murdered by a ghost. God, what a way to go. "Are you pretty?" she asked, a wide smile now contorted by a frown in the middle. Blood gushed from these slits as her face furrowed quizzically. Her hand holding the scissors had lowered, her eyes finally breaking from mine as she looked to the sky pondering. "Are you pretty? Are men pretty?" Once she looked away, it was like a weight was lifted. I ran, finally making it back to the base gate where the guards were a little unwilling to let me in because I was so scared. Man, that scared the hell out of me though. I didn't sleep again that night, and I called in the next day, and I told my commanding officer that I was sick with food poisoning. I marched my butt to the nearest shrine and gave 2 offerings to whatever spirits wanted it. I was barely in Japan for a month so far. 2 of these creepy spirits had already found me. I took every precaution I could from then on. Hell, I still had over a year at least for deployment at this point. After what Rue told me, I did some research too. I mean, know your enemy, right? Yeah, yokai don't play by the same rules as other ghost legends. These things could be pure evil, just hate in the most distilled form. Some don't give a damn about any offerings or charms. Despite my newfound caution, it's like I was a freaking magnet for weird stuff over there. Things were only going to get weirder until I finally got to leave. After the run-in with the Cuchi Saka Ona, I took things a lot more seriously. If I was out at night, I tried sticking to more populated areas and to be home before midnight. And even then, I made a weekly visit to the nearby shrine and tried to do offerings to cover my butt when possible. It worked for a couple of months too, though I did make it a point to look into some of the more common yokai just on the off chance that I ran into any. It turns out that even the most well-lit public places can be dangerous when it comes to spirits. No matter how safe you're trying to be, one of the most terrifying things about yokai is that they simply do not give a crap about where they show up. It was around October maybe, and I had gone out for a nice dinner with Hikaru, the girl that I had been seeing since my last encounter. It was nice. We walked through one of the parks at sunset. We were spending some nice time together. She was teaching me Japanese, so I was able to finally understand and conversate a little, but nothing beyond ordering at the restaurant usually. Either way, I was really falling for this girl, spending most of my time off base with her when I could. It was maybe around 11 when I walked her back home. A little kiss goodnight, and then it was off to the train station to get back to the base. Sounds easy enough, and I was in a pretty good mood after a nice date night of relaxing and having a couple of drinks. The subway was a lot more empty than I had expected, with the train platform totally empty by the time that I got there. 10 minutes on the screen until mine got there, so I took a seat on one of the benches to wait. Pretty sure that I started drifting off, the silence and flickering lights of the train station lulling me to sleep. Scraping sounds made me jump back with a start, thinking that my train had finally made it. Looking up at the screen though, there were still 5 minutes left on the arrival counter. The scraping was still going though, like something dragging along the rocks, lining the tracks below. I got up to see, wondering if maybe somebody fell onto the tracks while I was asleep and I didn't notice. It wouldn't be the first time that somebody had tried doing this to themselves with one of the trains out here. Hopefully that wasn't the case and it was just a drunken accident or something. I approached the edge of the platform, cautiously standing back before leaning forward to see the source. The scraping sound grew louder, like it was trying to rush along the ground much faster than before and getting close. I didn't even see anything over the edge before a hand came up over the edge, grasping the concrete platform before another joined it. The fingers were bloody, scarlet, shining bright against the pale white skin. A mess of dark black hair followed slowly behind, pulling itself up from the tracks toward me. Look, I may have been kind of stupid during my last run-ins, but I've watched The Ring and The Grudge before, and I know that pale girls with messy long hair are a problem. Needless to say, I started stepping back fast, desperately trying to get away. The scraping sound got louder as she heaved herself up onto the platform, long fingernails clawing at the clean cement, making terrible sounds. It looked at me, dark black eyes from pupil to edge, mouth wide in a silent scream. When she was fully on the platform, I could see the source of the dragging noise. Her body ended around her abdomen, jagged bones sticking out of still, bloody insides. As she crawled forward on her elbows and hands, the protruding bones scraped the concrete below, making the awful scraping noise and leaving a bloody trail. God, as it grew louder, it sounded like nails on a chalkboard mixing with a train running off the rails. My head was pounding and getting dizzy just listening to it. I finally snapped out of it and got my body to move, running toward the other end of the platform and the small guard station at the top of the stairs. I had seen an older guy when I came through, though he didn't look like he was in the mood to help. Hopefully he would make exceptions when it comes to yokai. Despite being somewhat in shape, I am the opposite of fast. So blowing out of the platform, I hit speeds previously unknown to man. I could still hear the scraping behind me as I flew by, desperately hoping to at least reach the stairs that might slow her down. Yeah, nope. I did the classic mistake, went up against weird stuff, and I looked behind me after hearing the sound of scraping metal join the ruckus. This chick was on her heels, a huge scythe held in one hand now, but walking along on her hands faster than a circus performer. I might have been propelled further by the adrenaline, especially because her face was more clear now, frozen in a disfigured scream of shock, anguish, and tormented pain that I'll never get out of my mind. As she got closer, she switched to hopping along on one arm, raising the scythe to cut me down to her size. Maybe it was the offering that I had done a couple of days before, but I think something was looking out for me as I finally made it to the steps. Bracing myself for the inevitable trip and fall, I launched myself toward them, trying to clear the first few. It worked miraculously, and her swing with the scythe went under my feet, as I landed 3 steps up, grabbing onto the railing. Even with my newfound luck, I had to keep running, legs and lungs both burning by now as I rushed further up the steps. It finally happened. I knew my luck wouldn't last forever, but barely 2 steps further up the stairs, I tripped, smashing my face on the edge of one of the concrete steps. It dazed me hardcore, and I could barely get my vision back as I struggled back up, blood now gushing from my nose. All I could smell was blood, but the persistent sound of the yokai was gaining on me. I could hear the scraping turn to tapping behind me, and getting louder as she pulled herself up the steps behind me. The jagged bones would drag up before flopping onto the next step, gushing blood from the exposed insides of her abdomen every time it was pushed in. The sound alone made me want to throw up, but the trail of bright red viscera behind her was something else to see. The train tracks behind her were glowing in the fluorescent lights above, looking more like the fires of hell with every second. There was no getting back up, my head entirely messed up and barely able to realize which way was up. All I could do was clamber back on hands and knees, pushing myself further up the stairs as she crawled behind. For a moment we made eye contact, making me stop in my tracks as something burned into my mind. It wasn't my memory, but I saw it like I was living it. A bunch of girls, just kids, pointing and laughing at me, telling me that my parents didn't want me, so why should they? I was never going to contribute to society anyway, especially not since I was already one of the kids forgotten to the system. It's pointless anyway, all this school that I've been going through, only to get scolded by the teacher for being stupid while the other kids laughed at me. And they were right. I should contribute to the people around me in the way that would serve them all best. My vision flashed away, now standing right in front of the same platform that we were at, looking at the speeding train heading my way fast. One light was on the front, warm and welcoming as I started walking closer to the edge. The conductor blew the train horn, though I'm not sure if he saw me. It would be too late if he did because I stepped off right before the train came barreling into the station. I could feel the force of the train and wind as it knocked me back onto the train platform. As my vision faded, I looked back to where the train was stopped now, doors open and people pouring out on their daily commute. On the floor, looking up at all the people who would be better off without me, my vision faded as my last view was the jagged remains of my spine jutting from where my waist should be. The train came screeching into the station, bringing me back from the terrible vision being forced through to me. More than fear, I was in despair now, tears stinging my eyes and broken nose as they trailed down. She was gone, no trail of blood or scraping sound in sight other than the train grinding against tracks, slowing to a halt. I ran even faster than I had running away from her, diving right through the train doors and past a crowd waiting to exit as soon as they had opened. Can't say that I blame them for giving out a little scream and fleeing, because I probably looked like a murder victim running from hell right then. Cowering in the seat of the train car, I kept an eye on everything around me, waiting for her to inevitably reappear to take me just like she was taken. There was one other person sitting in the car, a younger guy dressed in casual clothing, wearing a baseball cap. He would side-eye me occasionally, though I wasn't paying him any mind. Despite everything though, all I could feel for her was sadness. She had scared the crap out of me, sure, but from the research that I had done, she was a lost spirit. Even after running into the slit-mouthed woman before, the Ticky is still one of the most terrifying encounters that I've had. When I finally left the station, I caught a glimpse of what I think helped me get out alive. The guy in the baseball cap left the station in front of me, walking in the same direction outside. I wasn't far behind him, still stuck in my own little world when he looked back at me, giving a small whistle and a wave before suddenly disappearing. Like there and gone in a split second, with a tiny bit of smoke or vapor hanging in the air where he was. Through the smoke, I saw a little creature scurry off toward the nearby trees, leaping in and disappearing just like the guy. Back in the States, I would have thought it was a raccoon running off from the bushes. I couldn't place the thing and didn't for another few months, until I was out camping with Hikaru and a few of her friends. Out in the mountains, surrounded by trees, Hikaru and I were hiking a little ways from the camp to find some alone time, if you get what I mean. A little family of the same creature I saw came running out of the bush a little ahead of us on the trail. 3 tanuki, raccoon dogs, ran out and looked right at us before ducking back off into the brush. Hikaru made the loudest squeal that I had ever heard, a huge smile on her face as they ran off before telling me all about how people thought they were legends at one time. Apparently seeing them was pretty rare, and even though they are mischievous little shits, they're usually signs of good luck. So, despite all the terrifying things that I've run into, at least I can say I've got a little bit of luck on my side. Unfortunately, that luck would only go so far, and we stopped going camping a few months later. It was summertime when we went camping again, taking advantage of the beautiful mountain weather to go up with just a couple of friends. Me, Hikaru, Matt, and another newly arrived soldier named Jacob. We went up into the mountains on a Friday afternoon, everybody having requested leave weeks ago to stay up there until Sunday evening. We drove out to one of the mountain roads, parking off on the side and unloading the car. Tents, cooking supplies, and a decent amount of alcohol for a couple of nights out in the mountain air was exactly what we all needed. Hikaru and I were starting to get a little serious too, and I was thinking about popping the question. Not marriage, of course, but if she would like to either move back to the States with me, or if I should stay here when my deployment ended. I was ready to get out of this life, take a cushy job in the private sector, and put what I knew to use. I really liked her though, and I wanted her with me. The path to our camping spot passed by an old Shinto shrine in the woods, though nobody was there. Hikaru and myself walked in to do a prayer and offering to the kami of the land, while Matt followed suit out of obligation or superstition, I guess. I had told him about my experiences even after the talk with Rue, and he still thought that I was egging him on and messing with him. Jacob turned his nose up at the idea of offering a prayer to the mountain spirits, saying that he didn't believe in hokey stuff like that. The first mistake he made that weekend. When we got to the campsite, I was honestly ready to beat the crap out of Matt for bringing this kid along. He was a dick to the highest degree and just negative about everything that had happened. Even worse, I saw him go through at least 3 different snacks that we had packed for this day, and he threw every bit of trash off to the side. After we had set everything up, I asked Hikaru if she wanted to go for a walk, doubling back and picking up the trash he left along the mountainside. "He's kind of annoying," she said when we were far enough away from the camp. "You're telling me. I don't know if Matt's going to leave him out here in the woods at this point. Maybe we should go set up our own campfire." I winked at her, making her blush and turn away. We got all the trash we found, tossing it in a recycling bin near the main road and heading back to camp. When we got back, it was not ideal. Matt was trying to set up his tent while Jacob was making a general mess of things, pulling all of our supplies out with no rhyme or reason and scattering them along the clearing. Eventually, Matt got his tent set up, nudging Jacob and grabbing a couple of the fishing poles that we had brought along. They headed down to the river, hoping to catch our dinner before the sun started to set. Hikaru and I stayed back, getting a fire ready and prepping other parts of dinner, plus getting our tent situated. We were both sitting in the tent cuddled together and talking as the light grew dim outside, when Matt came running back screaming through the trees. "Go, we have to go," he shouted, tearing through toward our tent and bursting in without any notice. Jacob came tearing up behind him, screaming his lungs out in fear before tripping over some of the shit that he had scattered when emptying out his pack. "The hell is wrong with y'all?" I said, pushing my way out of the tent and stumbling to stand up. Matt was pointing to the edge of the clearing, the same direction that they had just come from, where the sounds of something dragging itself along the ground was coming closer. Trees were shaking, heavy thumps punctuating the dragging sounds. As it got even closer, a dense rattling sound like wind chimes knocking together grew nearer, clacking harder with each huge thud. I was having a flashback to the subway station at this point, hearing the sounds of the Ticky-Ticky's bones scraping across the concrete. Hikaru stepped out behind me, looking off in the same direction. We were frozen in place when the perpetrator burst through the tree line. I kid you not, this thing was a massive crawling skeleton. No, it was a skeleton made up of hundreds of smaller ones, skulls and bones forming together to make one giant abomination that was now making its way towards us faster and faster. Every single mouth on the thing was open, a raspy chorus of screams echoing forth as it made its way closer. "Run," Hikaru said, grabbing my hand and going back to the direction of the car. We hauled ass, tearing through trees and brush while getting cut by stray branches. The thing kept screaming and rampaging further and further towards us as it reached out massive bony fingers to claw its way forward in the dirt. It was gaining fast, with the car still at least a couple of miles ahead of us out on the road. "Crap, Matt," I shouted, remembering probably the most important thing. "Where are the keys?" He stuck his hand up. "I got him, just run." Jacob was screeching his head off behind us, the closest one to getting overtaken by the creature. Hikaru was making better speed than I was, with her just a few feet ahead of me and Matt leading the pack. The rattling got louder, the skull amalgamation shaking with jaws open and another screech, every single face on it echoing as they glowed in the pale moonlight above. It made the dark sockets of their eyes even more hollow, deep pools of black death that wanted us to join them. "Is there any way we can get rid of this thing?" I was shouting through my labored breathing. I hadn't had the misfortune of running into anything in months, and now I was going to get flattened by a Halloween decoration in the middle of the mountains. "The shrine," Hikaru shouted, pointing at the dim light of a lantern hanging down from it nearby. I don't know who came by to light it since we had been away, but thank God they did. As we got closer, Jacob started screaming louder, the rattling speeding up in turn. We finally made it, Matt ducking in first with Hikaru and I right behind. She pulled me in behind her, almost slamming me back into the wall. Jacob tripped as he went up the low stairs, falling right on his face before the doors to enter. Matt stepped forward, trying to help him by grabbing his arm. Even as he pulled Jacob in, something stopped the younger man from getting past the threshold. "God, please, no, please." He was screaming at us right there on the edge of the door with only thin air between, but unable to cross. The massive bones suddenly swung a hand forward, stabbing right through his torso with two long, sharp, bony fingers. It skewered him as he begged for help, voice fading as it lifted Jacob to its mouth, popping him like candy. The three of us could only scream, trying to push back to the furthest reaches of the shrine in hopes that it couldn't get through the door to us. "Gasha Doku," Hikaru said, breathless next to me. They can't be killed. We just have to try and wait until it gets bored. Maybe it will leave if it can't get to us. Our hopes that it couldn't get in were confirmed. A bony hand reaching toward the door only to get repelled back with a flash of light. The Gasha Doku stayed out on the path, pulling itself up to level 1 huge, empty eye socket right at the doorway, staring in at us with every small skull dotting it, smiling toothy grins. It was just going to try and wait us out, knowing that we couldn't go anywhere. It eventually let out another raspy scream, blowing hot breath through the doorway and blasting us with the stench of death. Hikaru and I held each other, trying to shrink back from the atrocious smell, but nothing helped. Matt was cowering in a corner, crying and begging for help from whatever god might be out there. The Gasha Doku was getting impatient though, every angry spirit that it was made of crying out for nourishment and blood. One long skeletal arm raised into the air, preparing to smash down on top of the shrine and just get rid of the barrier. We braced ourselves, eyes closed and crying as we expected to be crushed to death. Instead, the rattling started in earnest, only to be cut off by a heavy thump, something crashing to the ground beside the shrine instead. I opened my eyes just in time to hear the Gasha Doku scream again and get hit with the deathly odor before it started rattling faster, making its way back down the path from where it had come. Standing in front of the shrine now, the huge skeletal arm clutched in one hand with a huge paper fan in the other, was a huge man with small wings on his back. As he turned, I caught sight of hardened eyes, exuding seriousness over a long pointed nose on its red face. "Kami," Hikaru said under her breath as she stared in wonder. The man waved his fan, disappearing into the night with a gust of wind and taking the arm with him. Just like that, the terror that was only feet away had come to pass, our lives saved by an unknown guardian. We went back to the car because hell was staying out there when we just saw a damn giant skeleton eat a man in one bite. There was no way that we were staying to figure out if the yokai would come back. Not like Command was going to believe us when we told them any of this. Matt and I made up a story on the way back, Hikaru nodding along and putting it all to memory. Jacob had started getting drunk, more and more of an asshole, and when Matt finally told him off, he got pissy and huffed and puffed off into the woods. We haven't seen him since then. Command got the local authorities out for a search and rescue operation along the mountain, but the most they found was his fishing rod, still thrown aside down by the stream. That was my last encounter while I was there, thankfully. We stopped camping after that, even with the aid of what I came to find out was a Tengu, a guardian deity for different regions. I wasn't eager to face a giant skeleton again anytime soon. We went back to base and I kind of just absorbed into myself. Hikaru and I drifted apart over time, even though we still keep up as friends. It just didn't end up working out. She had a family here that she didn't want to leave, and I had about enough of getting nearly killed by ghosts. Briefly, we talked about moving off to another prefecture, but that idea just wasn't meant to be. So, after about a month, we just agreed to break it off clean. That was that, I guess. Matt wasn't well after what had happened. I don't know, maybe I'm more open considering that I had more tame run-ins with my first yokai. Maybe he just wasn't able to handle the ramifications of what this could mean. The dude grew up a pretty hardcore Christian, so I can't imagine seeing a behemoth skeleton did a lot for his faith. They eventually gave him a medical discharge, though I'm not really sure where he had ended up since. I moved back to the States after my deployment was over. I'm still here now and doing my own thing. On occasion, I still have nightmares about my run-ins, and even the slightest of scraping sounds makes me paranoid that the Ticky might be nearby again, finally coming to finish the job. I don't know if it helps since I'm back over here, but I've taken to doing small offerings. It gives me some comfort at least, despite the terrors that keep coming back into my mind. Sometimes I think about going back to visit. I've even started talking to Hikaru again, catching up after nearly a decade apart, and seeing how both of our lives have changed. She's talking about coming to visit the States soon, wondering if I might be open to showing her the sights. Who knows, maybe I still have some of the luck from that tanuki hanging around.